Hello friends, this is the end of the Alfred the Great series, but you can watch this video in isolation. Please do if you're already here, it'd be a big help, please. But if you have already seen it, or when you go back to it, it may give some context as to why the Anglo-Saxons were so successful in the 890s in defending themselves and fending off the Viking raiding parties that was sort of running rampant throughout the country at this time. In this video, we're going to go through the chronology of these events and Alfred's role in them. We're going to have a look at the educational and religious reforms, as well as a look at some of the Alfredian translations. And at the end, as a little treat, I'll give a little bit of detail and background on the Alfred duel and what we think it was. If you've happened across this YouTube channel, you'll notice that it's very small. So if you can give a bit of support, if you deem it worthy, that would be great. And give me a subscribe as well. Firstly, we'll discuss the chronology of events in the 890s, before the passing of Alfred. Following the death of Guthrum in 890, the Vikings did not cease their antics in any way, shape or form. Despite the Burgle network and defensive measures being oversaw by Alfred, a Viking army from eastern Francia were provided with ships in Boulogne to take themselves and their horses in 250 ships to the River Rother in Kent and took for themselves a half-made fortification at Jutherburnen before moving nearby to build a fortification at Apeldoorn. Asser actually notes himself in Asser's Life of Alfred how unsatisfactory it was to have half-made fortifications and the dangers of. I'll read you a little excerpt of it so you can really see how annoyed he was. But if, during the course of these royal admonitions, the commands were not fulfilled because of people's laziness, or else, having been begun too late in a time of necessity, were not finished in time to be of use to those working on them, I am speaking here of fortifications commanded by the king, which have not yet been begun, or else, having been begun late in the day, have not been brought to completion, and enemy forces burst in by land and sea, or, as frequently happens, by both. Then those who had opposed the royal commands were humiliated in meaningless repentance by being reduced to virtual extinction. The Viking threat only increased as Haston came with 80 ships. Fleeing from famine on the continent, he and his men sailed up the Thames and made for themselves a fortification north of Kent in Milton. Now there was a raiding party here in Milton, and a raiding party not too far away, over there in Apeldoorn. But Alfred was not going to sit back and do nothing. In 893 he gathered his army and camped between the two raiding parties to give his men the opportunity to get at either of them if they began causing any trouble in the surrounding areas. Alfred was about to negotiate terms with Haston at Milton, which included his two sons being baptised, but while these pleasantries took place, the forces at Apeldoorn went on a spree across Wessex. However, as these very Vikings attempted to transport the war booty which they had collected from Hampshire and Berkshire, they were intercepted by Alfred's son Edward and his men, resulting in the Battle of Farnham, which sent the Vikings fleeing. They fled to Thorney Island and fortified it, and Edward, in his youthful vigour, caught up with them and planned to besiege it, though it was unsuccessful due to a lack of supplies for his men. Alfred was currently en route to relieve Edward's men of their call-up or their term of service, but got news that there were Vikings currently besieging Exeter and another group besieging a fortification in Devonshire, so he set his sights westward and set out to save the day. Alfred's son Edward joins Alfred of Mercia in London, and together with a force of men, they return to Thorney Island and overpower the Vikings, taking hostages and letting the rest of them leave to join up with Heston in Benfleet. Shortly after, in 894, Edward and Athelred set off to Benfleet to show them what for, only to find that Heston was out raiding and absent from the camp, but they were able to take hostages, including Heston's wife and two sons, who were sent to Alfred. However, since the negotiations of Alfred and Heston, Alfred was the godfather of one of these boys, and Athelred of Mercia was the godfather of the other. Therefore, Alfred returned the hostages back to Heston. In the same year, two other raiding parties gathered at Shoebury, where they made a fortification and travelled along the Thames before being joined by great reinforcements from Northumbria and East Anglia, before going up along the River Severn. The Anglo-Saxons were prepared to give chase, and they gathered together in some serious fashion. There was Athelred of Mercia, Athelhelm of Wiltshire, and Athelnoth, who supported Alfred when he fled the Vikings. Thanes from Wessex and Mercia and even some Welsh were on board, as southern Wales had already submitted to Alfred. Together they caught up with the Viking force at Buttington, on the Severn shore, and besieged them from every side, in a fortification the Danes had found themselves in. The English army had settled on either side of the river, and the Vikings were trapped. Whilst Alfred was out west in Devon fighting against a Viking army of ships, Athelred of Mercia was starving these Vikings out of the fortification, to the extent that they actually began eating their own horses. In a desperate bid to escape, they charged at the army settled on the east side of the river, and many of those Vikings were slaughtered on that day. The ones who survived fled to Benfleet, and the Vikings convened in East Anglia before winter to secure what money and women they had. From here it is said that they gradually migrated themselves all the way over to the Wirral and occupied what was once a Roman fort. The English army only caught up to the Vikings once they'd settled in the fortification, but they besieged it for 2 days, burnt up all of their corn, and allowed their vast amount of horses to graze on and trample on the surrounding lands. This fascinating tactic has been referred to as a scorched earth strategy, whereby you damage the rival's environmental assets to prevent them from remaining supplied. In 894, these Vikings had to leave as they couldn't sustain themselves, so they took to raiding in Wales, got a bit of war booty, and upon their return they travelled by Northumbria and East Anglia to avoid Alfred's men, eventually finding themselves on Mersea Island, before sailing up the Lee and making a stronghold, likely in Hertford in 825, roughly 20 miles north of the Anglo-Saxon London stronghold. Alfred had his men camped in the vicinity of this stronghold, and one day he rowed up and along the River Lee to see where the river might be obscured. Once he found a suitable location, he had fortifications made on either side and obstructed the river's flow, resulting in the Danes' ships being trapped. They abandoned their ship and the fortification and marched on foot all the way to Bridgnorth. This interesting tactic was once used by Charles the Bald against the Vikings in 862, and the same tactic would be employed by the English throughout the 10th century. In 896, the Viking army, perhaps tired from being relentlessly outwitted by the English, split. Some went to Northumbria, others to East Anglia, and some just sailed out of Britain to the continent. So despite Alfred coming out of all this drama better off than the Danes, he had seen a large amount of thanes and ealdormen die in his service. He was certainly not without his losses. In this very year, however, we see how Alfred dealt with war by sea. Viking forces from Northumbria and East Anglia were ravaging Wessex along the south coast in what are referred to as askers, which are Danish warships. To combat this, Alfred ordered that a certain design of longship be built, which were almost twice as long as usual Saxon boats, often having more than 60 oars. His military reforms played a huge role in why the Vikings struggled to make any real mark in this decade, as Alfred's people were often in a fortified location and his army could move and mobilise at ease. Alfred's ideas would surely have been an enormous strain on his people, but his success highlights how capable of a people the Anglo-Saxons were and how desperate they were to retain their homeland. If you asked Alfred, however, what won him the fight, all be told, he would surely say that God did. Alfred believed that the Viking invasions were God's wrath upon him and his people, which must have played a role in his endeavour for a religious reform of his country. He was so invested in this idea, according to Asser, that any folk such as judges or aristocrats deemed not doing their jobs justly would be given the ultimatum of giving up their offices or dedicating themselves to the study of wisdom. Asser stated that almost all the ealdormen, reeves and thanes who couldn't read as kids really vigorously dedicated themselves to learning how to, rather than give up their offices of authority. The Alfredian translations are 7 works, translations from Latin to Old English, said to be related to Alfred's educational reform. These books are Psalms 1 to 50, Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, St. Augustine's Soliloquies, Boethius's On the Consolation of Philosophy, Gregory the Great's Dialogues, Gregory the Great's Pastoral Care, and Orosius's History Against the Pagans. These translations are done with a high degree of skill, being quite faithful to the originals, although there are minor changes in some areas, perhaps to make them more relatable to an Anglo-Saxon audience. Furthermore, Augustine's Soliloquies was originally 2 books, whereas the Old English translation inserts a 3rd. Whilst Gregory's Dialogues was attributed by Asa to Werthof, Bishop of Worcester, and Bede's Ecclesiastical History and History Against Pagans are often attributed by historians to have stemmed from a source outside of Alfred's court. The remaining 4 translations are in a very similar style, and it's very possible that they were penned by the same person. The preface to Pastoral Care, for example, explicitly states that it is part of Alfred's push for an educational reform. Boethius' On the Consolation of Philosophy being part of this educational reform is a fascinating choice by Alfred, as it was not a well-known work in early medieval England. It was written by Boethius as he awaited his execution and was attempting to come to terms with his fate and find peace in his situation, and explores this through both Christian and a secular consideration. So when considering the life of Alfred, which was incredibly privileged whilst also burdened with great stress and responsibility, as well as a lifelong sickness, it becomes easier to understand why Alfred would have been captivated by this work, especially towards the end of his life. One particular link this piece has to Alfred is the insertion of a passage relating to kingship, or the craft of being a king, which was not found in the original Latin work. It talks about the 3 fellowships, those who pray, those who work, and those who fight, and how a king needs them as they need a king. This was a way of perceiving society which was relatively modern to Alfred and his contemporaries. And before we close off, as promised, I'll quickly tell you about the Alfred Duel. I mean, look at it. Look at it. It's beautiful. How could we ever ignore it? The Alfred Duel was found near Athelney in 1693, which was the location where Alfred fled to in 878 and later established a monastery there. It's made from rock crystal associated with the Roman period, and it's held within a gold casing with an enamel panel showing a figure holding some kind of plant. There's also a socket on the bottom, and I shall tell you for why. In the preface to Pastoral Care, there is mention of an astle, which should accompany the books. An astle is a pointer, which helps people keep track of where they are in the text as they read along the lines. Therefore, the socket would have held a wand-shaped piece of wood or bone to act as the pointer. Other less intricate socketed objects had been found here and there, indicating that a tradition of reading aids came alongside the educational reform, which seems sensible seeing as many adults were now learning how to read for the first time and perhaps needed all the help they could get. So, if you've made it through this entire series, you've seen just how crazy King Alfred's life truly was. And all the evidence we have point to a king who was truly invested in his people, his land, his faith, and his heritage. In the year of the Lord's incarnation, 899, at the age of 51, King Alfred died, presumably from the long-term health issues that had been recorded by Asa. But with the modern understanding of how stress can affect how long we live, it would seem silly to discount that it may have played a role in his early demise. In 886 or 887 that Alfred's daughter Athelflaed would marry Athelred of Mercia, which would further consolidate the power and authority of Wessex. It's possible that the ceremony took place in London, which was a common place to hold church and royal gatherings, regardless of where you were from within the English kingdoms. And it would be at this ceremony where King Alfred the Great would be proclaimed Rex Anglo-Saxonum, King of the Anglo-Saxons. Now this was great strategically for it to be proclaimed in London, because London brushed shoulders with the people of Wessex, of course the people of Mercia as it was in Mercia, and also the Vikings in East Anglia. So everyone who Alfred wanted to hear that he was the king of the Anglo-Saxons would have heard it. So the 890s have been a brutal clash between English and Dane, Christian and heathen, Alfred and those who would wish to tear apart his legacy. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle in 899 described Alfred as king over the whole of the English people, except for that part that was under Danish rule, and he was subsequently succeeded by his son Edward, who we know as Edward the Elder, Alfred is my favourite medieval king, which is why I wanted to kick off my channel with a bit of a documentary about him. So I hope I've done him justice and honour. Rest in peace, Rex Anglo-Saxonum. Please subscribe if you've enjoyed this. Believe it or not, I do put a lot of effort in. So it would be great if you could just show a bit of support to a little old channel like mine. But yeah, have a wonderful day and Godspeed.